Hi there, Dr. Paul Donovan here, and today we're talking about how to use your power better as a leader, especially in relation to whether you are preferential or fair. So this is such a critical area of which to look into, and how you use your power and whether people experience you as being preferential or fair is a really often nuanced and subtle but critical aspect of your leadership. And as you know, in this particular video, you might know, we're utilizing the Dr. Julie Diamond's 7 scales that she created over years of research and looking at anecdotes and stories and narratives of how leaders use their power poorly and well from managers and consultants all over the globe. Once they were pulled together and themed, she discovered with her team that there were 7 scales, and today we're looking at preferential and fair. So, preferential and fair, let's have a look at this. What is it? What are we thinking about in relation to preferential and fair? Well, this scale, whether you've done your 360 or not, doesn't matter. This video is for anybody who just wants to learn how to use their power better. I'd like you to consider, to what degree are you as a leader considered to be someone who treats people fair and evenly regardless of personal preference? Fair and evenly regardless of personal preference. Now, I know when you hear that, you might be thinking, of course I treat people fairly. Stay tuned. You may not be as fair as you think because issues of power are just notoriously hard for us to see in ourselves. So if you're experienced as preferential, then people will see that you're playing favorites. And you may spend too much time with people who you consider allies, or people you just like a lot, or people you trust more, and you may be considered to be treating people unfairly. That is, you may be assigning work unfairly, or maybe more even particularly if you're really right down this end of the scale, hiring or even promoting people. This is not as uncommon as you think. It's just that most managers never think they're the manager who's doing it. But those people in teams underneath these managers often have persistent doubts about whether someone has been hired for one reason or another. Was it nepotism? Was it someone they knew, someone they just really loved because they had a great relationship and they brought them from their last company, irrespective of their skills? It can happen subtly, and if you do this, you'll be experienced as being preferential. What about in the middle? You see, if you score yourself in the middle, then maybe that's going to be the place where people consider you not so much someone who hires and fires unfairly, but maybe just allocates work in a way that isn't quite as even or as clear as it should be. And that they still consider you to have some people you simply trust a lot more and give more attention to. So that's if you're experienced in the middle. I wonder where you are. Think carefully now. Think carefully. Are you someone who's considered in the fair? So someone who knows, who for every of their critical actions can relate it to a relevant policy and may transparently connect their actions to that policy. Not only that, they give equal time and attention to people in their team. Are you beginning to get the feel for this? The beginning to get the feel for, whether you might be experienced as preferential in the media or fair, and the implications are enormous. But why is this such a misuse of power? Why is it a misuse of power if you are experienced as a preferential? Well, here it is. You see, as the leader, you have more freedom to associate with people in your team that especially in people, the teams that report to you. You may find yourself naturally migrating towards people you feel more comfortable with, people you trust more, people you consider yourself just to be a little safer with. And if you do that, it is a misuse of your power to do that. You see, it's very hard for the team to give you feedback on this, especially hard for the people that you're spending time with. They might be a little bit uncertain or a little bit uncomfortable that you're giving them attention, and they're probably even enjoying it. But that doesn't mean it's a good use of your power. It really isn't. It's an ineffective use of your power to pick and choose who it is, depending upon who it is that you might feel safe or comfortable with. So, it's not good use of power, and it's this misuse of power is generally not because managers are deeply sinister or they've got some big agenda. They're simply unconscious of how where they're providing their or giving their attention to. So here are the outcomes and the problematic things and the good things that can happen if you're experienced. So first of all, if your experience is preferential, the outcome is cliques. The outcome is factions, in-groups, out-groups. I've worked with many teams who've had in-groups and out-groups. One team I was working with had, there was pretty much down the line, in between, half and half, people who'd been there for only up around 9 months or so, and people who'd been there for around the average 5 years. There was a newcomers and an old-comers group, right? And so that was there. And it was setting up real tensions in this executive team. What it turned out, though, interestingly, as I was coaching the CEO and working with this team, is the CEO had actually hired most of the people who were the newcomers and had not hired those who had been there for 5 years. And as a result, the CEO just found themselves naturally spending a lot more time with the newcomers. He would tell himself it was because of orientation demands, but the reality is he was overdoing it. And now it was setting up tensions and heating up this problem of newcomers and those who'd been there forever. He was being experienced as preferential, and in fact he was being. So if you're fair, then you're going to be experienced as someone who's even-handed, who plays out policies in transparent ways, no matter who it is, no matter what kind of relationship you have with them. So let's go on and talk now about what you can do about this. How do you get better at this? I hope before we look at this, you've gained some understanding about the subtleties of this scale, how it may be happening and it's an unconscious bias, and how important it is to raise your awareness to it. So if you're experienced as, preferential, I'd like you to consider these questions. The questions you see on your screen right now. How vulnerable are you to flattery, for instance? Are there some people who are just more effusive about you, and do you find yourself spending your time with them, or a little more open or a little more responsive to them because of that? If so, then you may be preferential, and that's something I'd like you to build your awareness of. Do you rely on some more than others because you just see them as someone who will come through, and therefore you begin to, in a non-transparent way, allocate work? Because you have some special relationship built up with them because you trust them more. It's nothing wrong with having some people who you consider to be more competent, but you'll need to be transparent about the way you allocate projects. Now, do you surround yourself with people who have a certain power or certain political connections? Do you notice that some people have a really good relationship with your boss or your boss's boss? So you become especially sensitive to your relationship with them. And if so, then you may be becoming preferential, and this is your action to become aware of how you're spending your time. If you're in the middle, then this may be not so much about your devastatingly unfair hiring practices, but what I'd invite you to do is to make more conscious connection between the actions and decisions you're taking and the relevant policies that are in place that support your actions. Be transparent. It may feel tedious. You may even feel a bit defensive when you're doing it. But I'd like you to know that in the first place, especially if you're new to the team, it's essential that you make clear connection between these important decisions you're making and the relevant policies that are there. And if you do so, then you're going to be experienced as more fair. Get second opinions on any hiring. Try not to do it all on your own. Involve your team in useful and relevant ways. Now, if you're experienced as a fair, then this is a kind of interesting piece of advice I want to give you, but if you are being experienced as fair already, then maybe you like to acknowledge your team in public forums, and that's great, and you think you're doing it in an even-handed way, and you probably are. Just be very conscious of the dangers of giving public praise, because the people who receive the praise are still probably liking it. Most do, some actually aren't that keen on it. But you know what? We're so vulnerable to be feeling less than. I don't know about you, but most of us have families where, brothers and sisters were in the good books or the bad books, And if someone was in the good books, then I had to be in the bad books. There was not room in the good books for everyone in one point in time. Is that a family clique that means something to you? All of those old stories get raised when we start being too effusive about some members in public. So now let's go to what you can do about this. I just want to give you an exercise, something that you can use that's practical. Do you see all these circles moving around on the slide here? This is what I'd like you to do. Put your name on one side of a piece of paper and then simply make 3 zones. So the first zone is someone, if you're right, is the prickly zone. The next zone is neutral. The next zone is comfy. Now, what do I mean by that? I'd like you to consider what your experience is of each person that you really do need to do work with, and certainly include anyone who directly reports to you. But bosses and even peers could appear on this sheet. So a circle with a name. So please don't put something like HR group or logistics department. Must be a person that you work with. Now, what do? Here's the thing. I'm going to ask you to make a rather tricky decision, a rather tough decision, and I'm going to consider who in your team belongs to which of these zones. So for instance, when you think about each person, consider, is this someone that I feel really comfy with? Someone who I feel really very much at ease? Someone who I feel safe with? Someone who I look forward to working with? And I do this exercise where I ask a manager sometimes to stand. I ask them just to relax. I ask them to hold in their mind the person in their team. And as they do that, they might even close their eyes and then they might just lean forward. If they lean forward a little bit, it's a telltale sign that this is someone they feel very comfortable and safe with. Now that may sound a little spooky to you, I'm not sure. But these exercises are decades old and they've been tested by thousands of managers and we know we hold a certain energy in our body around people in our lives. And this is one way that your unconscious mind can just tell you a little about how you experience these people. And so you could be telling yourself, oh, it's really great. But the truth is you may not actually be feeling that way about this person. And your behavior about them will show. Some people will be in the neutral. So you don't think about them when you're not with them. It's not a bad thing. You're not uncomfortable with them, but it's pretty transactional. It's come and go and then you're done. That's the neutral. Then there's the prickly. So there I'd like you to think about the people for whom you consider it's just a little bit uncomfortable when you're with them. Now, by the way, they might feel fine with you. It's got nothing to do with that. It's got everything to do with how you feel about the space between you and them. So once again, you might stand, you hold that team members in mind, you might shut your eyes, and then you notice, done this with many people now, they just find themselves falling back a little bit, just a little bit. They're the people you realize, I've got a different kind of charge in my body, and they're the prickly kind. Now, once you've mapped your team, take a moment to do it. It can be really kind of interesting to do it. I remember when I first did this exercise, someone I loved very dearly and I'd been in my life for many years. I realized when I did this that they were in the prickly category. It was extraordinary. But you know what? When I did it, I realized that I'd been making lots of compensations around them, overriding my feelings of discomfort. And I needed to behave a little differently and be a little more authentic with them about my experience. So they were a very close friend. Actually, they were prickly. So both can be true. So here it is. So what I'd like to ask you to do now is once you've made your map, think, how might this map be influencing you in terms of who you're spending your time with? Do you tend to migrate to spending time with the comfy? Are you avoiding the prickly? Are there people in the comfy that because you've developed a rapport with them that you might be giving certain work to them or hoping to promote or even hire people like them or their friends? These are really critical questions. This exercise can give you an insight into how you may be rather unconsciously preferential. So I want to underline this. Managers who I've sat with who have considered themselves to be more preferential, or have even done the 360 and discovered that those around them consider them to be preferential, have not been people with some sinister intent or agenda. They've simply been people whose unconscious bias has guided them and has influenced them more than they had realized. And then if so, it's a very poor use of your power as a manager. You have power, you have rank as a manager. Now it's your obligation to be awake to how your experience of the relationships of the people around you could be shaping how you're relating to them. Preferential versus fair. I hope you found this helpful. Check out the other videos. There's several there for you to choose from. I hope you really enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon. Bye.